Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fleet World Fleet Management Webinar 2026, What Fleet Leaders Need to Know. I'm Simon Harris, editor of Fleet World and EV Fleet World, and I'm delighted to see so many people joining us today. As we navigate 2026, the productivity gap between small van fleets and larger commercial operations is closing. Compliance and data requirements are only getting more complex. From the 4.25 ton EV derogation to the July tachograph deadline for international routes, the standard van fleet is now facing HGV level scrutiny. Car fleets also face challenges. So our goal today is to bridge that gap in information, and we'll be discussing how to leverage technology to automate compliance, protect your drivers using AI, and evaluate the business case for electrification. So our webinar is sponsored by JAMA and Webfleet, and I'd like to invite our experts to introduce themselves and give us a brief overview of their respective platforms. First of all, I'd like to introduce Kelly Pinner, Major Accounts Sales Manager at JAMA. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Morning all. For those that don't know me, I'm Kelly Pinner. I've worked for JAMA for 15 years and been in the fleet industry for about 18 now. And I have the privilege of every day working with fleet professionals, understanding the challenges that they face on a daily basis and working with them to provide opportunities to deliver meaningful change within the industry using software solutions. JAMA is a fleet management software solution provider. We've been around for 2 decades with the single goal of making the operational challenges for fleet operators simpler, more streamlined and more efficient.
Thank you very much, Kelly. And now I'd like to invite James O'Dell, Key Account Manager at Webfleet, to say a few words about himself and Webfleet's activities.
Yeah, morning everybody. Yeah, thanks for having us. Yeah, James O'Dell, Senior Account Manager at Webfleet. I've been with the organisation for the last 7 years, and yeah, I guess similar to the guys at JAMA, we're working really closely to help fleets run safer, more efficient, and more sustainable operations. And we're trying to do that with real-time vehicle, real-time driver data to make some practical improvements. So for those who don't know, Webfleet, we are a European leader in telematics. We've been part of the Bridgestone family since 2019. So that gives customers kind of world-class technology, and we're supported by one of the biggest names in mobility. So my role is to kind of really understand fleet challenges and make sure they're getting the maximum value from Webfleet. So yeah, really excited to be here today to share some thoughts and some insight.
Thanks very much to both of you. Now let's get into some of the detail of today. The first topic this morning is the commercial productivity gap. Now, to James, most of our van fleet world readers are in the 3.5 ton LCV space. So how is Webfleet helping them squeeze more drops per shift out of those assets and identifying dead mileage?
Yeah, it's a real kind of challenge, and I feel like fleets have been, we've kind of known this, but I feel like it's been kind of elevated over the past kind of 18 months, certainly with some external pressures that have come around, staffing costs and things like that. And we're trying to really kind of get more and more out of the resources that we already kind of have in fleet. So for me, this kind of question works in 2 ways, really, actually. It's about how do we maximize jobs per day with the assets that we already have? But at the same time, it's with that dead mileage, it's do we actually need all of these vehicles? And I think that's quite key. So utilization has become a real big focus. So from our side, it's trying to give customers a clear view around how these vehicles are used through the day, start, finish times, where we can actually see the dwell time. So actually, where is that inactivity? So crucially, if there's a job that should be taking 45 minutes and actually we've seen the job's taking 2 hours, what's kind of happened in there? So we can start to build a picture and a bit of a debrief at the end of the day as to say, well, actually, this was my shift. It should have been 10 hours. It was actually 9, 12. Actually, here's where these jobs took longer than they should have done. So we can start to think about those efficiencies, and are there potentially conversations we need to have with drivers, but also maybe customers that maybe aren't helping, that we need to kind of think about differently. And I think once we really kind of understood that, the operational improvement accelerates when you start thinking around like workflow and tools like that. So, we're able to plan jobs, we're able to get them in the right kind of sequence and allocate these to drivers. And I guess at the next time, it's around the squeezing of the jobs. It's how do we optimize that route? So making it maybe the shortest route, the better sequence, and the reduced mileage. So there's things we can do there, but also where we work with third-party integrators that plan these schedules and push them into Webfleet. So we start to build the plan, we start to optimize it to make it as efficient as we can. And I think the game changer is kind of then having something dynamic in terms of truck, or certainly in this case, vehicle specific van weight dimensions, speed limit restrictions visible to a driver, so that actually once they've been served their work, they can then navigate to that in the most efficient way. So we kind of do see drivers that maybe, they know their area, they know their territory, but actually do they know there's traffic 20, 30 minutes down the road? So really it's, once we've got that best in class schedule that's created, it's then actually making sure it's optimized on the road, because things happen. So we start looking at things like your planned versus actual, your route deviation. So again, we start to kind of really build more of a picture as to getting the plan right and having it delivered successfully on the road. So customers are really kind of telling us we are seeing fewer kind of, I guess, like empty legs. We're seeing less standstill time on site. And ultimately, this kind of really supports the whole ecosystem in terms of lower fuel use, reduced wear and tear, and ultimately better customer satisfaction. That's kind of what we're gearing to. And I guess the last thing I would say on this point is it really aligns to some of the work that we were seeing in the past 12 months with our UK Fleet Safety Report. So we've gone out to 200 fleet decision makers, and 58% of these are saying that AI is driving a lot of this optimization. It's going to be a real big shift in productivity moving forward. So I think we're seeing that shift in our platform, but also in general, that AI is going to help us and make things a little bit easier in terms of automation.
Thanks very much, James. Kelly, as fleets expand and they grow into the 7.5 ton bracket, they hit the O license wall. So how does JAMA make that transition feel less like a mountain of paperwork for them?
I think that was a great introduction to that actual question. Working in that space and transitioning is not just an expansion of fleet, as we all probably know. It's more of a governance change, a culture change, and unfortunately an entire supply chain change that we have to take account of. And I think there's foundational work before anyone steps into new systems, new processes. There's foundational work on how do I launch that fleet? How do I make sure that we've got processes behind the scenes that drive operational safety and resilience? And I think one of the most important things outside of systemization is making sure you have that network of people around you to get that best practice advice, to speak in forums, to listen to people in the industry that have been there and done that and got that t-shirt. And understand what good looks like to support you rolling out that fleet before you even think about starting. But when we're talking about rolling that out and systemizing, changing into the 7.5 ton world, we're talking about, as you said, operator's license, and how do systems control that and support customers to make sure it's consistent, to make sure that it's protected, and to make sure nothing's missed. So organisations that use systems such as Key2 will make sure that you have a standardised asset profile, that you can make sure that asset profile automatically attribute PMIs and that they're scheduled in the correct manner, and that conformance is completely visible to those stakeholders that are responsible for that, giving exception alerting out to the business to flag non-conformance or predicted non-conformance, ensuring that digital vehicle walk-around checks are being done consistently and reporting is available, and trend analysis where potentially things aren't being done in a consistent manner. And then you also have integrated services, so organisations like Webfleet support activity like this as well, but bringing in supply chain data to make sure that you've got one single source of the truth, to make sure that you can make strategic decisions moving forward that are data-led rather than just a feeling and a thought process. What's most important about any heavy goods fleet is being able to demonstrate a continuous and auditable control of that fleet, and having solutions that provide that audit trail and provide that consistency will give you that picture.
Thanks very much, Kelly.
No problem.
Yeah, moving on to maintenance and duty of care, which we perhaps touched on a little bit in that discussion. To Kelly again, moving from a car mindset to a 7.5 ton mindset. Maintenance isn't just an MOT anymore. How do you help fleets avoid these dreaded roadside prohibitions?
So there's multiple layers within solutions that support this kind of activity, and I think it's about, as I mentioned previously, standardisation, but it's also about making sure that compliance tracking is intrinsically built within the culture, within an organisation, making sure that drivers understand behaviour changes, so when they're unfortunately having to do new activity. So some drivers may have never been under the remit of doing daily vehicle checks, understanding the importance of those, and transferring that data into a central repository electronically will only give that robust solution to manage that through systemisation. I think we've done a recent benchmark and compliance study about the industry and where different organisations are at, and moving away from those paper solutions, moving into a more centralised, information-driven activity is something that organisations are slowly embracing as we move through, especially into the heavy goods sector within fleet.
To James, while Kelly's focusing on the schedule, you're looking more at the vehicle's pulse via CAN-bus. How are you spotting engine faults before the driver even sees a warning light?
I think something that we hear a lot of, repeatedly really, is that there's so much data there now. Like kind of Kelly was alluding to, it's like, you know, new processes. It's how these things are onboarded and trained out to make sure that they kind of flow in the right kind of way. And certainly in this kind of maintenance space and this kind of fault code, it's more about kind of having maybe clarity rather than just lots of data. I think, you know, we're able to look at kind of health of vehicle in real time, but really the kind of trend that we are seeing more and more is, it's don't tell me about everything that's working, give me the exceptions, tell me what's not working, tell me what's really kind of cause me pain and affect my kind of business efficiency. So I think from a strength of ours and where we add kind of a lot of value is how deeply we kind of read the CAN-bus data that's coming out of those vehicles. We've got a real kind of specialist team that are reverse engineering these signals with a huge range of manufacturers. And instead of kind of presenting fleets with raw fault codes, we're turning things that are quite complex into meaningful insights that they can act on. So I guess fleets are really busy, and you know, we are Webfleet, as is JAMA. We're two parts of kind of the fleet ecosystem. You know, fleets are probably running 5, 6, 7 different systems, and it's how do we get those to talk to each other. So it's not just about detecting the issue, it's then about, for us, where does that go? So whether that's in Webfleet, whether we then integrate and that pushes into fleet management, it's where does the information need to go? Who do we need to update in real time? So we take that notification, lights on the vehicle, and then we go and identify that and create schedules and what have you. It takes care of itself thereafter. But fleets now, they don't really want just to know when the dashboard light comes on. We're looking now much deeper in terms of those behavioral changes of a vehicle, temperature shifts, different fluctuations, these kind of micro signals that maybe wouldn't appear on the dashboard and they wouldn't appear to a driver, but it's about moving into this more predictive space now. So we're trying to identify events much earlier so that we can actually get more of into a proactive downtime. We don't want to be into kind of reactive downtime. So we're trying to get on top of things before they escalate. And that's a real big trend of where we're seeing the marketplace going now. And for us, it's not just about tell me what's happening, it's tell me what could happen. So really, this is just trying to give fleets the attention of where it's needed on the vehicles that aren't performing as they kind of should be.
Thanks very much, James. One of the questions that, just as a slight aside, that one of the participants submitted yesterday was a question about attendees and their grey fleet. So we currently have a poll live in the chat, if you haven't seen it already, asking some questions on grey fleet. So if you want to participate in the poll, we've got a question relating to grey fleet at the end. But anyway, that's just alerting you to that in chat before we move on to the subject of electrification and the 4.25 ton derogation. This is a big talking point, James, and how do we actually prove an EV is fit for purpose before a commercial vehicle fleet makes that transition?
We see it as kind of a fleet, and the industry was saying is this, this is going to be a really kind of big leap in terms of going from what we've always known into kind of this kind of new world. And I guess the listeners are on, we know that, from an LCV point of view, there's best part of 4 million LCVs that are on the roads. From a electrification point of view, right here, right now, it's approximately 3 to 4% of vehicles that have been electrified. So from an actual, the scale of it, we've got an awful long way to go. And I guess for those that don't know, but things like the ZEV mandate, the zero emission vehicle mandate is kind of got kind of teeth. And, certainly in 26, we see that, 24% of van sales need to be zero emission, ramping up to 70% in the next 4 years. So we know that it kind of EV's coming. We also know there's legislation that is kind of gearing us up towards this. So for us, it's about trying to help fleets make smart and low risk decisions when bringing this on, and especially around the duty cycles. So typically we would look to say, right, we want to give confidence. Let's analyze your fleet data, for a minimum of 90 days, but really you want kind of the full seasonality to kind of really work out of your fleet and your analytics, what vehicles are doing, what mileage and how much, what's the maximum that vehicle is actually traveling. So when we know that, we can start to model the data around, right, well, if I know the vehicles are doing the maximum of 150 miles, okay, well, what vehicles are out there that can do that? And we start to kind of model that, not just for summer, but really we're looking at worst case scenarios. So let's look at winter performance. So where we've got vehicles saying they'll do 200 miles, maybe with not as much payload, let's reduce that down so we can start to kind of build in that worst case scenario. And what that does is it helps identify the low risk entry points. If 10 vehicles need to be purchased this year and 2 or 3 are going to be electric, we need to know where we can drop them in as a natural fit. And from here, we start then to kind of take the next kind of step in terms of proving this, because once we've found out, right, well, this vehicle could do it, it's then, well, actually, how am I going to charge this thing? How am I going to charge this vehicle? Is it going back to a home, back to a depot? And all these things are going to impact what the transition looks like, depending on the operation and the type of need. Some fleets might not be able to have, 30 minutes of downtime in the day for charging, for example. So we need to really think about that. So once we've figured this out, and actually we're thinking about managing this in life, we look at the state of charge of the vehicle, we look at the actual miles per kilowatt hour, we look at the different braking modes and the regeneration that's being used or not used, because the right foot has a massive influence on the range of these vehicles. So the coaching becomes really important. It's one thing saying the vehicle can do it, it's then actually getting it in the real world. And then driver A and driver B might be very different drivers in terms of how they interact with that vehicle. So the coaching element and showing them these sort of tips and tricks around, heating the seat and the steering wheel rather than the cab, because that's a much more efficient way of not losing any or as much battery. It's those things around onboarding that are going to help promote, because what we typically see is when a driver gets into an EV, they love it and they don't really want to go back because it's a great environment to be in. And I guess certainly from some of our research, we definitely see that, because about 54% of these 200 fleet managers say that drivers are in a stressful environment, and that's a real big thing that we're trying to reduce. So this onboarding of an EV is super important. And I think the last one I would add as well, just in terms of some of the success of this, is around, integration. We mentioned it earlier, but we've got something called the EV services platform. So we have a platform that is built via our API that we're working with a number of partners in our ecosystem across charging, planning, payments, to reduce some of the barriers, so that actually, if you know where your vehicle is, you know where it's being charged, are those vehicles together? We're trying to make these challenges go away in the most simple way, so that when a fleet brings a vehicle on, they know where they need to be going. So we're trying to take the guesswork out, is what we're trying to say, and give some practical pathways to make this work.
Kelly, higher weight means different costs, tyres, charging infrastructure, etc. How is JAMA helping fleets track that unique TCO if they have to go up to the larger vehicles?
I think a lot of the TCO for the electric vehicles is still pretty unknown from a end of life perspective. But what we support customers with and work a lot with customers with is basically centralizing that data from supply chain. Tyres, you mentioned, bringing that tyre data into a central place and enabling trend analysis to forecast budgeting, forecast end of life costs, and make sure that organisations have a clear picture today, because centralisation of supply chain notoriously in our industry has been really challenging, because data comes in all shapes, sizes and formats. And as we know, people will categorise cost in different ways. So our solutions are designed to give our clients the ability to see that in one place and make budgeting and purchasing decisions based on benchmarking, true tangible benchmarking from their real life world environment. Because what we've seen across our customer base that are onboarding EVs is each use case is so varied, and as James alluded to earlier, every use case is so different. So having data built upon your own vehicles and on your own fleet and on your own TCO is the way that you can make strategic data-led decisions going forward.
It's just, I was going to just add to Kelly. I mean, you're absolutely right. I think, and we've seen that. We've definitely seen that over the past couple of years, really. That the vehicles in terms of are maybe coming a little bit more into kind of parity, but it's kind of to really kind of make it work, not just based on our mileage, but actually, there is a huge commercial thing here. It's actually thinking about, well, when I look at the energy costs and all these things, we need to build everything in to really see if it stacks up. So what we would say is any kind of modelling that is done on a electric vehicle that's going, well, actually need to have a full TCO, because just like for like vehicles, it's not going to work. When we think about energy reduction in maintenance, etc., that's when it really kind of stacks up commercially and not just sustainably. So TCO as a whole for this is massive.
And it's really challenging, isn't it? Because you've got to balance that TCO and making sure you're sweating those vehicles as much as humanly possible with that compliance balance. And that is the challenge that every fleet's under at the moment, making sure those vehicles are, going off the road as little as possible, but are as compliant as possible to make sure that total cost of ownership is aligned.
Thanks very much, both of you. That was a really good insight there. We move on now to safety and driver behaviour. Van drivers face some unique risks. So how is AI camera tech moving beyond Big Brother and actually protecting the driver from false claims being made against them?
I certainly see that's kind of the narrative that's kind of been there in the past a little bit, is that it's kind of Big Brother. I guess we're trying to move more into kind of, let's say, Big Mother, more so. But what I mean by that is, telematics historically, as probably a lot of the listeners know, it's been kind of dot on the map, moving into driver behaviour, but it's really thinking around what happened kind of on the road. Saw a harsh braking event, what happened? It's then the next layer of why did it happen? And a lot of the AI now that we see is really kind of closing that loop, because a forward-facing camera is kind of giving you the context front of the vehicle, maybe side cameras, but then it's kind of the internal that goes, well, actually, what did lead up to that? What really was that driver dealing with in that moment? So it's about just kind of, for us, it's changing the narrative a bit around what it's doing. The way it's being positioned is this device is there as a safety tool. It's designed to protect drivers and not kind of punish them. And how it's working is it's looking for distracted events. It's looking for things like phone usage, seatbelt, fatigue, and it's giving the drivers the ability to kind of get self feedback in the moment, in-cab feedback directly in the moment, so that driver can self-correct and make a change before any risky situation escalates. I think that's really powerful, because it's about getting our drivers home safe to their families and loved ones. So from a footage point of view, it gives that kind of clear footage. We're really kind of understanding what's occurred. what I would say, not just in the vehicle, but also externally. You know, we're doing a lot more now around tailgating, lane crossing, stop signs. So at the same time, we're not overwhelming a driver. We want to make sure that we've got it in a balanced way, that we can configure this to say, well, what do we deem as our most risky incident, and how do we configure this, which all gets done remotely. And how this all works, it then feeds into our coaching tool, OptiDrive, and that kind of gives managers, let's say, more of an accurate understanding of their driver's risk profile, but also the drivers themselves have different driver apps to then actually view their performance. And it means that coaching can become a lot more targeted, because some drivers might be doing better at other things, some drivers might need certain coaching. So we kind of start to build that individual profile at a driver level to really try and introduce, you know, fewer incidents, but ultimately make drivers more confident. And I think from our side, it's about having a level of continuous business improvement, because we can look at risk, we can look at the percentage of incidents that are happening, and let's say we've tackled seatbelt use and we're happy with that. Potentially from a scoring point of view and a weighting, we look at other KPIs, other factors that we really want to focus on around phone use distraction. So from a business, we've got a real kind of journey that we can take customers on to really kind of tackle improvements over time and really make sure that these drivers are protected on the road.
Thanks, James. And to Kelly, how do we ensure a driver's risk profile stays updated as they hop between a car or a van or a truck?
I think James has just kind of really explained how powerful the data that we do have now can be. And it's about making sense of that data. As James said, there's lots of tools that will guide a driver through the daily life. Now, what the fleet manager needs, from a back office perspective, is understanding, right, taking that tangible data from somebody like Webfleet and going, right, this is my driver profile from Webfleet. What other elements of risk do my drivers need to manage to make sure that it's centralized and we can make tangible training or guidance decisions from an overarching perspective? So things like bringing in risk scores from telemetry, making sure that our drivers are having their license checked and the categories are correct for the licenses that they're jumping into on a daily basis, and we're giving them keys for, making sure those categories are aligned with that asset type and that particular license, and ensuring their CPC tachograph monitoring is obviously up to date. And what solutions like Key2 can do is centralize all of those different data points into an agile risk profiling tool that organizations based upon the job role can then score based upon the importance of each of those risks, and automatically drive critical alerts if, for example, a license check comes back and a category of license has dropped off their license or expired. So it's about taking that supply chain, taking those really important data points, centralizing them and giving insights to fleet managers to make operational decisions on.
Yeah, I was just going to add there, Kelly. Yes, it's important, right? And we, again, I know I mentioned earlier that we're one part of kind of the fleet management world, but I guess from a risk point of view, you've got a driver score, and let's say, for example, a driver's scoring really highly, not really having many events, but actually they've maybe knocked off 3 wing mirrors, for argument's sake. Now, perhaps we're not going to be capturing that information, but it's going to be captured in something like JAMA. So again, it's kind of we're one pillar of risk, and then I guess it's from a other points of view around that vehicle, around, like I said, those kind of incidents, any kind of maintenance that really, it's clutch, whatever it might be, brakes, excessive wear, etc. Those kind of things perhaps we're not capturing. That's why kind of the combined partnership approach kind of gives a much more holistic view of kind of what risk really is when you bring other factors into it.
Absolutely. And just coming back to the point in the chat, you talk about grey fleet. We've got grey fleet drivers that basically we need documentation from those drivers, making sure that we understand that they have got the right insurance, the right MOT for those vehicles that, we're not tangibly touching and seeing and paying for and all those kind of things. So it's about bringing those elements into, have we got this document? Have we made sure we've seen it? It's those types of things that really combine everything into one umbrella.
Thanks very much, both of you, for your insights into that. We are looking at some of the questions submitted now into the chat. One of them is, my company's focus is on SME grey fleet, including EV. The aim is to educate this sector with regard to non-conformance. Our company is a driver training company with coaching and behavioural emphasis. is there a transitional path between companies who do nothing to changing their focus to not just have driver assessments, but getting them to understand the need for data and its management?
Yeah, I think from our side, I guess it's we do see it. We do see a general trend around kind of I guess twofold risk. You know, I think there's ultimately out there kind of a level of duty of care that is required across kind of fleet. So I think that's kind of twofold. I wouldn't necessarily say there's a pathway, but what I would say is there's definitely solutions out there from like an entry level point of view that can be. It doesn't have to be full blown telematics. It can be quite maybe like light touch to start with. What I would say maybe more so in kind of that grey fleet space, that we do see more kind of OEM enabled devices now. So we are able to ingest OEM data. So from a pathway, if you're kind of looking to kind of move into that space, it's, you know, there's OEM data available now. We've got access to 20 OEMs as a pathway to bring in, and then we start thinking around risk thereafter. So if that is a pathway you're thinking about, hopefully that's maybe answer some of that.
Yeah, I think it's a challenging one. Grey fleet is notoriously challenging to manage, as we all know, but it definitely is a culture thing. So driving culture and driver behaviour from the top down seems to be the most success that businesses I work with have, and it's having that culture of making sure that drivers are continually informed, that fleet policies are clear and consistent. Drivers feel like they're not. Big Brother's been mentioned a couple of times, and we do struggle with that in our world, but that it's for their safety rather than just us looking in on them from above. So there are entry-level tools where, you know, drivers can e-sign to say that they've got these things. They can have portals to provide that documentation back to the organisation, and then you can go into full-blown, you know, telematics, supporting those drivers on fleet. But I think it definitely is a culture thing. It's more of a making sure drivers really understand the importance of it.
The only other thing the other thing I was going to add was kind of, I guess, in that grey fleet space, is that it's also how do we help them a little bit more. And I think there's other ways we can do things around, like, you know, vehicle checks to start with, just so you've got your own duty of care in that space. You know, you might have grey fleet, but I still want to know what's happening with that vehicle, not necessarily with location data perhaps, but it's like, at least I want to know that that vehicle is okay and being looked after. So I think there's other things we can do around that. Also things like HMRC compliance. There's also other kind of these other sort of softer benefits that are there as well that can kind of support some of that world as well, and from a mileage capture point of view as well.
Yeah, thanks both. I think the poll results, I suppose, so far is 80% of participants have grey fleet in their business, and it's split sort of 45% have a sort of rigorous checks and enforcement, and 20% is more informal. So clearly there's, you know, a difference in the levels of monitoring and enforcement of grey fleet drivers across the industry. Are there any other particular challenges that your customers are facing at the moment?
I mean, from a grey fleet perspective, it is a challenge. It's a mindset of a driver that it's my own vehicle. Pardon the phrase, but jog on. You know, I look after my own vehicle. What's it got to do with you, kind of thing? And I think that is the biggest challenge that we have with grey fleet. From a systemization perspective, education. You know, from solutions like Key2, you can send out communication to the driver community, give them insights on what is important about it. And as James called out earlier, it's important to tell the drivers and give them a clear understanding. It's about their safety. It's about making sure when you're driving on business, we need to understand that you're safe out on that road. And the only way that companies can do that is by driving that through culture, as mentioned earlier. It's the only way.
Yeah, the last thing I was going to add on that one is just if I think about a slightly different angle, I think about it from a sustainability point of view. Organisations out there are going to have their own level of scope 1 reporting and their own direct emissions that they're going to have to report. But by the same token, in that kind of maybe SME space, if you're working with large corporates that do have other requirements, there might be things like scope 3 reporting. So this is around kind of the supply chain. So as well as safety and duty of care and the vehicle being safe, there's also potentially an actual a CO2 reporting element that may need to be factored in if, for whatever reason, you are asked for that data, which we see kind of ramping up.
Is there something that you can do with that, in terms of monitoring and collating all of that data?
Yeah, so for us, it's kind of, when we think about, certainly from a distance point of view, not just distance data, but actually we kind of work in actual real world fuel consumption, actual fuel monitoring. So we can not just say, it's not necessarily finger in the air, let's say, to say that it was this many miles and this is what we think the fuel was. We're actually given the real burn from the tailpipe, exactly how much litres have been burnt. So from an accuracy point of view, we're accredited with an organisation called TÜV Rheinfeld. So what that means is our methodology of collecting fuel data is accredited across kind of Europe. So we're in a position that that data is readily available at the touch of a button in the platform. So that is there and can be quickly attained, but it's another way of thinking about supporting the onboarding potentially of grey fleet in maybe a slightly different way.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you've got the telemetry. I can imagine it's a difficult rollout into grey fleet. What we do support is apps for end user drivers to kind of provide their own duty of care back into solutions like ours, making walk around checks more standardized, more simple, more clean, so it's not onerous on the driver, but also, as James mentioned earlier, giving them access to other data. So from a freedom of data perspective, grey fleet drivers have the same access as company car drivers. I can see my own driving license. I can see when it was last checked. I can see my fleet policy online. I understand where I stand as a driver, and I can provide the information back to the business that I need. And it's just making it as simple as humanly possible. Because as drivers ourselves, I'm sure, if it's difficult, they give up. So making it as streamlined as possible, one single portal ideally, so they don't have to jump in and out of different devices all the time. So consistency is key when it comes to grey fleet.
Thanks very much. And I think we'll probably bring the session to a close. So I want to say a huge thank you to our audience for your time and for the participation today. And it's clear that as we head further into the year, there's all kinds of considerations in the fleet management space, whether you're navigating the 4.25 ton transition or bracing for July tachograph changes. The expertise we've heard today from Webfleet and JAMA shows that tools are there to make this evolution seamless. So thank you again to our speakers, James O'Dell from Webfleet and Kelly Pinner from JAMA. If we didn't get to your specific question, our partners will be following up with you directly. And for more on the 2026 outlook, stay tuned to Fleet World and EV Fleet World for the latest features. But thank you again for joining us, and you'll receive more information from the sponsors following the session. Thank you very much.